Asus's VIVOBOOK 13 Slate OLED is a quirky yet remarkably good value Windows 11 PC or tablet. Everything that you see here, the tablet, the removable magnetic kickstand, the magnetic type cover, the stylus, even this carrying case, all come in at just £600, at least for the previous generation model. Pricing for this one should be pretty similar, although as always I'll leave a link in the description for you to check out if you're interested. For some context, that's not far off what Apple wants for just the Magic Keyboard and the Apple Pencil for the 13-inch iPad Pro, without the actual iPad. So while this seems like a great deal, and I do kind of think it is, you should also temper your expectations on this at least a little bit. Now on the surface, the pun intended, this is a remarkably well-built tablet. It feels premium with its metal shell, the leather-feeling magnetic folding stand, and no, I don't know why this is a magnetic and detachable piece, but it is, and even the type cover feels pretty decent. The tablet itself is pretty thin and light enough to not bother you when traveling, but it still feels pretty good in the hands. The detachable keyboard cover does have a bad habit of detaching rather easily from the stand, especially if you pull from any one of the sides. It's quite easy to do, which also can get pretty frustrating because, well, with tablets like these, I always find they're almost impossible to get comfortable, sitting nicely on my lap. And when you do find a good position, you'll often find that that's when the type cover decides to fall off. What's more frustrating though is the type cover's rigidity, or lack thereof. The keyboard section actually is not the problem here. It feels pretty good. There's a decent little bit of travel, the keys feel nice. It's a pretty decent typing experience overall, especially on a flat surface like a desk. And actually even on my lap, it worked pretty well. Now the problem here is with the trackpad. Unlike a lot of type covers, Asus decided to fit this one with a physical mouse click. I mean, you can hear it here. Not bad. I mean, that's generally a good thing. A bit of extra kinesthetic feedback is always welcome, but in this specific design, it fails in one crucial way. I don't know if you can hear that, but see, if you're typing with this on your lap, you might start to notice some ghost clicks. No, this isn't from bad palm rejection, does that perfectly fine. It's from the type cover itself. See, when I bend it, even slightly, you hear the click. In fact, yeah, this is it's triggered from when it gets bent on the bottom, and that's just fantastic. Of course, the real star of the show here is the OLED panel. It's 16:9, something that a lot of other tablets don't offer, and 1080p, specifically 1080p 60, and that's definitely lacking, but the panel itself really makes up for it with absolutely stunning colours. It looks beautiful. Everything looks vibrant with just stunning perfect blacks. According to my Spider X, this panel actually offers more than 100% of the DCI-P3 spectrum and almost manages to offer both 100% there and in the Adobe RGB spectrum, which is a rather difficult feat. The max brightness I saw here was only around 370 nits, a fair bit lower than the 550 nits that Asus claims, and a fair bit less than I'd want for outdoor use, especially when the sun's shining. But for indoor use or for, like when you're traveling by train or plane or anything else, it's perfectly fine. It's beautifully accurate too. Not absolutely perfect with a maximum delta of 3, but an average of 1.63 is pretty great, especially for a tablet, and even more so at this price. Now, being an OLED, you would expect this to have near instant response times, and technically it does. Only technically though. Here's a look at some of the response time results that my open source response time tool captured, and yes, you can buy one of those from me at osrtt.com, link in the description. On a falling transition, you will generally find it to be effectively instant. I'm measuring around 1 millisecond here, but on a rising transition, i.e. going from a darker shade to a lighter one, you'll find that it does the kind of weird but standard OLED undershooting. It doesn't exactly get to the right, the correct light level on the first frame after a change, and because this is a 60Hz display, what that means is that you've got to wait another 16.7 milliseconds for it to actually finish that transition. In practice, that doesn't make too much of a difference. It's not like it's a gaming machine or anything, but it is something that I think you should know about before you actually put your cash down on one of these. Something that you might have noticed, or maybe not, down at the bottom right of those results is the result latency, as in how long it takes for the machine to register the input change and to start changing what's being shown on screen to match that request. Those results were taking around 80 to 100 milliseconds. That's really, really bad. Like, a normal laptop takes maybe 20 milliseconds at most. So for this to have 4 to 5 times, more latency is pretty bad. If you're wondering if that affects the stylus input, the answer, unfortunately, is yes. Here is some 1000 FPS footage of me swiping the pen quickly across the screen. I count about 100 frames between me starting to swipe and the tablet starting to draw that line on screen. While it isn't quite unusable, it does mean that it's rather difficult to be precise with this. You might also notice with my fast swipes here just how much of the line gets drawn at once. Because this is only a 60Hz panel, any sort of fast movement like that is going to be even less accurate and smooth. Even though the pen is apparently sampling at 266Hz, a weird number to go with there, Asus, if the display that you're drawing on doesn't update anywhere near that fast, aka just 60Hz, you get quite a disconnected experience. In my novice hands, I'm not all that bothered, but I'm sure that for a more talented hand, that might be a frustrating experience. Still, you do get the fully featured experience with 4096 pressure levels, varying pen tip force, and the stylus can also do some cool features like if you tilt it over you can do shading versus a finer point if you're pushing straight down, plus 4 interchangeable tips for different levels of resistance. It really does feel like the complete package. Also, the Asus pen just charges with a hidden USB-C port in the upper section, so there's no need to have this, sticking out of a tablet's, the tablet's charging port like an absolute moron. Now, something that isn't quite as fully featured though is the I/O. You get a grand total of 2 USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, both of which can support display outputs or charging, as well as a headphone jack, a microSD card slot, and that's about it. While that is a hair more than an iPad, for a Windows machine that looks like it's wide enough to fit a USB Type-A port on it, that would have been nice to see, but I guess for the sort of people that are actually, using this, living the dongle life isn't that big of a deal. It's not really aimed at power users, but let me know what you think in the comments down below. Something that is pretty decent is the battery life. You've got a 50 watt-hour battery, which Asus claims should give you a full 10 hours of usage out of this. I would say that's more like 6 to 8, depending on, the screen brightness and what you're doing. But all of that is somewhat mute thanks to the Windows Modern Standby feature that still plagues every Windows laptop. It's incredibly frustrating as this will turn itself on and then just drain the battery constantly, and more annoyingly, it will start clicking on stuff because the display thinks that the type cover is a finger. It was really annoying to find it opening PayPal and a bunch of other tabs. It's kind of impressive really, but still for a Windows machine, the battery life definitely isn't too bad, although it's not necessarily keeping up with some of the other tablet type things, especially at this kind of price tag. Performance, on the other hand, well, that's just kind of non-existent. Just trying to load a web page on this can take a while. The watercolor brush in Adobe Fresco is clearly rendering at maybe 10 FPS at most when it's mixing colors, and in my Unreal Engine 4 response time testing window, which happily runs at 600 to 1000 FPS on any other machine, well, that could only run at around 40 FPS on this. Yeah. If you must watch this thing be brutalized, let me show you just a simple comparison. On the left here is our poor little Slate OLED with its Core i3 N300 octa-core and 8GB of RAM. And on the right is a modestly spec'd Acer Nitro 5 with a pretty modest i5-12500H. Nothing too fancy, but let's run this with Cinebench R23 multi-threaded and see how they compare. I'm going to speed this up a little bit so we don't have to waste too much time here, but the, again, still modest i5 is done rendering in less than half the time of the N300. The i5 nets a score of around 12,000 points compared to just 3,500 from the N300. The fact that the 8 cores in the N300 don't offer hyperthreading makes me think that these are just 8 of the efficiency cores found in the Alder Lake lineup. Plus the fact that this has a 7-watt TDP isn't helping its performance, or lack thereof. The processor is by far the weakest part of the package. I would call it underpowered even by today's standards, and I don't think that it will hold up very well going forward either. The meager 8GB of RAM definitely isn't helping, although at just 256GB of storage, and much of that is eaten up by Windows and formatting, that might end up being possibly the bigger deal breaker. While I can't imagine that you'd be filling this with pictures, despite the front and rear facing cameras, neither of which are particularly inspiring, you might still want to store some programs and movies for your travels, and plenty of artful drawings as well, and so I can see how this might get a little cramped rather quickly. Apparently, at least according to Asus's spec page, some models markets might get 512GB of storage, and that is definitely a better deal for sure, but still that's a bit tight. The biggest problem by far with the Slate OLED though is the fact that this is a Windows tablet. The usage experience leaves a lot to be desired. I found myself needing the type cover to be connected to be able to operate the machine effectively, and even with Windows scaling, the whole user interface is just horrible to use with touch or pen only. The on-screen keyboard does show up about 5 seconds too slowly, and the handwriting input does technically work, although it's pretty naff for detecting handwriting and definitely slows me down compared to just using a keyboard. Needing to double tap the tiny buttons, on the icons on the desktop to launch apps, or to have to swipe up to find the taskbar, even things like having the tiny buttons for apps themselves, or the absolute mess that is the advertising board, start menu, it's not a cohesive experience compared to something like the iPad or even an Android tablet. The usage experience with an iPad Pro is seamless. It's smooth and responsive and well thought out. You have an endless library of apps that are easy to navigate with touch or pen inputs, and you can even use it more like a PC if you want to. You have a freaking M2 chip and 8GB of unified memory in the iPad Pro, and if you opt for more storage, you actually get 16GB of RAM instead. Sure, it does cost more than 3 of these things, but it is safe to say that you're getting a noticeably better experience. I think all in all, this isn't a bad tablet. Windows really makes it hard to recommend, although at the price that we're expecting it to be, it might not be too bad. The previous model could be had for more like $350 in the US right now, which I think is a fair bit more of a reasonable price once you factor in the distinct lack of horsepower, the small storage space, and, well, Windows. It really is a bit of a weird, in a bit of a weird position. It's not powerful enough to be your main PC while traveling or not, but it isn't ARM and running a touch-first OS like Android or iPadOS, so it doesn't really fit into either category. If drawing is important to you, you might want to look elsewhere for a faster refresh rates and lower latency option. If you want a media consumption device, just get an Android tablet. If you want a one-size-fits-all PC tablet that isn't really powerful enough, maybe check this out. With that said, those are my thoughts, but I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. What do you think about the Asus VIVOBOOK 13 Slate OLED? Catchy name as always. Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments. Is this something you would pick up? Would you go for something like an iPad or an Android tablet instead? Or, does this meet your needs? And if so, I would love to know what those sorts of needs are, what the use case someone might actually have for one of these is. Otherwise, if you want to check it out, I will leave a link to it in the description if you're interested. If you want to see more videos like this one, probably more gaming related stuff in general, then do hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notification icon. There's also plenty of other videos that will show up in the end cards in a second. There's a load of links in the description if you want to support me in these videos. You can do so through YouTube, Patreon, pick up a hoodie or t-shirt like this one, a load of the designs that I made myself. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you are interested in an open source response time tool, or soon to be the open source latency testing tool, there'll be a link to that in the description. That's osrtt.com. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you on the next video.